Earlier today, Banking Committee Chairman Chris Dodd laid out a financial reform bill that everyone admits has been watered down to win Republican votes. If you want to see how the bill lost its teeth, just look at the fine print. For examples, the bill creates a consumer protection agency to be a watchdog on credit cards and mortgages, but it would be inside the Federal Reserve, not an independent agency. It allows shareholders and company boards to vote on executive compensation, but those decisions are not binding. The bill lays out a process to, quote, wind down the so-called too-big-to-fail banks, but there's a lot of red tape and a potentially lengthy appeals process for that. And it has a new tough regulations for risky derivatives like the kind that caused the financial crisis in the first place. But the fear is that the banks, or should I say the fear is that thanks to lobbyists and lawyers, many of the worst offenders would be exempt. Joining me now is Texas Congressman and former presidential candidate Ron Paul. Congressman, good to have you on tonight. From what you know of this bill, does it go far enough? I know that you and Congressman Grayson have got a bill up there to audit the Fed, but what about this Consumer Protection Agency being an arm of the Fed? What do you think?
Well, that gives more power to the Fed and doesn't do the job. Of course, I don't argue for more regulations, but I support Barney Frank on this, that it should be independent and out of the Federal Reserve. The whole idea of putting it in the Federal Reserve and giving them more power, and they get the financing, they call it self-financing, which means it's out of the prerogatives of the Congress to audit it. So to me, I don't think it'll do a job. I think everything they have in there, there are loopholes in it. You know, whether they're trying to pretend to regulate the big banks and all. I think there's a lot of loopholes in that. But I'm for regulation, but I'm for much more regulation of the Federal Reserve. And I think as long as you have a Federal Reserve that is the lender of last resort, all the regulations in the world won't compensate for this because they know, they work on the assumption that there's always availability of credit. That's the purpose of the Federal Reserve, to be the lender of last resort. And that is what causes the moral hazard. That's what causes people to make all the mistakes and take these risks because they figure the Fed will be there to pick up the pieces and the people get stuck.
Congressman, what about shareholders and board members deciding on executive compensation? Are you okay with that?
Well, I think it's a great idea, but I wouldn't mandate it because I'm not a regulator. But I think that I wouldn't be interested in buying into a company that runs roughshod over the stockholders. So yes, I like the idea that they would vote for it, but I just don't go into this idea that the federal government can go in there and do that.
So what regulation would you be for, Congressman Paul? Would you be for the really new tough regulations on risky derivatives? How about that? Would that play well for you?
Well, you know, this Volcker rule I sort of am sympathetic with, you know, to say that some of the things that can't be put in there because they would be vulnerable to the FDIC insurance. And I voted against repealing Glass-Steagall for that very purpose. So I think that's well intended, and hopefully I can support that. I don't know the exact details on that, but it's something like that, inviting people to take risk and not restrain that. I don't think we should open the door to the taxpayer being liable to bail out all these people. So something like the Volcker rule I would be sympathetic to and look at closely.
This is kind of a tough call for you small government guys, isn't it? I mean, you don't want Wall Street to want to run away with anybody's money, but in the same sense, you're not one that wants a whole lot of government intervention and regulation. Yeah,
that's why I argue really for the true reform, and that is the reform of the Federal Reserve and the whole concept of money. Because once you allow governments and a secret bank like the Federal Reserve to create money out of thin air, you allow things like wars to be fought because you don't have to be responsible. The Fed will pick up the debt.
Yeah.
And the deficits are huge today because of the Fed. If people are worried about a $2 trillion increase in the national debt this year, it couldn't happen if you didn't have the Federal Reserve to be the lender of last resort to the politicians for whatever reason. But there's a collusion here. The conservatives like to do it to fight wars. Liberals like to do it to have unlimited welfare. And therefore the Fed it benefits both the conservatives and the liberals, and it destroys the money ultimately, and that's why I'm so interested in looking at the Fed in detail.
Congressman, good to have you on with us tonight. Thank you. Ron Paul from Texas.